Photography is one of the most enjoyable, rewarding hobbies that anyone can get into. But like any other creative endeavor, it can be challenging and downright frustrating when we aren't able to capture with the camera what we see in our mind. These 7 tips will help you level up your game while you're starting out, and the last one is so important that I actually made an entire YouTube video dedicated to it. They're simple elements of photography, but are often overlooked by people, myself included, when starting out. Now, I want to preface this with saying that this video is geared more towards people who are newer to photography, and if you're an experienced photographer, you're probably already aware of most of or all of these tips. But I just wanted to make this video because while I've been doing photography for almost 12 years now, I still remember what it felt like when I was first starting out. How overwhelming it felt going through the menu of my camera for the first time and reading all of these terms that may as well have been written in a different language. How excited I was to buy my first prime lens, which I actually still own to this day, mostly because of sentimental value, but it's still a great lens. So I wanted to make this video because I feel like these are the tips that when I was first starting out, they would have helped me the most and improve my game the fastest. Anyways, tip number 1. The exposure triangle. If you hear the terms shutter speed, aperture, and ISO and don't know exactly what they mean and exactly what they do, this first tip is for you. I remember when I first started shooting, I was really inspired by this specific portrait photographer, and I would try to take portraits that were similar to his, but I just couldn't do it. Every shot I took just felt kind of off, like it was missing something, but I couldn't explain why. It was only once I hopped onto YouTube and started to learn more about shutter speed, aperture, and ISO and understand what they meant that I was able to see where I was going wrong. You only need to understand one thing to take a picture, and that's how to properly expose an image. And by expose an image, I don't just mean how bright it is. Sure, you can just set your camera to auto, but once you have a good grasp on shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, your ability to create and capture all different kinds of images will be massively expanded. These 3 mechanisms exist on every single camera, whether it's a film camera, a mirrorless, or a cinema rig, and having a solid comprehension of them will allow you to look at an image you're inspired by and be able to translate what you love about it into your own shots. Now, this is supposed to just be a quick tips video, and explaining these 3 things would take an entire video of its own, which I've actually already done, so if you don't know what the exposure triangle is, you can pause the video and check it out here. I'm just putting this tip first in the video because I think when you're starting out, it's the most important thing you need to learn because it will give you an understanding of the tools that you have at your disposal and allow you to be more creative with your work. Tip number 2, aperture priority. This next tip is for anybody who does any kind of event photography, whether that's conferences, corporate events, wedding photography, concerts, or anything in between. I'm going to use weddings as an example because I shoot a lot of weddings, and let me tell you, when I'm shooting a wedding, my camera is set to aperture priority virtually the entire day. Because when you're shooting an event or anything live action, anytime you spend fiddling with your camera settings, you could be missing an important moment. By setting your camera to aperture priority, you're essentially telling the camera, this is the aperture I want to shoot at, and allowing the camera to adjust the shutter speed and ISO to reach your desired exposure. The reason that aperture priority is so helpful is because when you're shooting an event, you're not just shooting one thing in one place with one lighting setup. You're shooting many things that are happening all around you in all kinds of different light. You might be taking a photo of somebody who's brightly lit in the sunlight, but then over to your left, something is happening where the sun isn't hitting and it's dark and you only have 1 second to get the shot. By having your camera set to aperture priority, you don't have to adjust the shutter speed or ISO in order to accommodate for the difference in lighting, and you won't miss the moment. The reason I like aperture priority is because you can have your camera set to a nice shallow depth of field, and anytime you need to accommodate for getting more of the background or more people in focus, it's just a quick flick of the dial. You can adjust how bright or how dark you'd like your shots to be by moving the goalpost on the light meter. If your subject is backlit, you'll probably have to move it up a bit to compensate so your subject isn't too dark, for example. Once you set your camera to aperture priority, I'd suggest going into your menu and choosing a minimum shutter speed. This will tell your camera that if it needs more light, it can't drop the shutter speed below a certain point, which would result in a blurry image. Your minimum shutter speed will vary based on how much you and your subject is moving, the focal length of lens that you have attached, in-camera stabilization, and so on, but the basic rule of thumb is that whatever focal length of lens you're using, your minimum shutter speed should be double that. So for example, if you have a 50mm lens equipped, your minimum shutter speed should be 100 or 1/100. I find this doesn't quite cut it for me. I might have shaky hands, so I'd set my minimum to 250 and just leave it. Tip number 3, shoot more than you think you need to. Now for this tip, I'm not advocating to just hold down the shutter button and spray and pray. There is such a thing as overshooting, and you'll know that you've done it when you're culling your photos on your computer and you find that you have hundreds or even thousands of duplicate images from the day that you now have to spend hours sorting through. What I mean by shoot more than you think you need to is, say you're shooting street photography or a wedding and you see an interesting moment happening and you stop after you get the shot. But if you stop there, you could be missing an interesting moment that happens immediately after you got that shot. For example, you might be shooting a bride getting ready for a wedding and she asks you to get a portrait with her mom. And if you just linger for a little while after you get that shot, you might capture a really nice moment that the two of them share together. And if you're shooting something more controlled, like a portrait session, and you only take one shot of each pose, you might bring the photos into the computer later and realize you got the perfect shot, but the eye is just a little bit out of focus. I've done this. I do a ton of portrait photography and I usually take 3 to 5 shots of each pose, and it's quite common that I'll find that I'll bring them into the computer later and see that while all of these images are very much the same, one of them just stands out a little bit more for one reason or another. Taking more shots than you think you need to will give you more options later in post, and if you're not shooting film, there's really no drawback to taking a few extra pictures. Tip number 4, learn to edit. During my first few years of photography, I spent a lot of time shooting with different subjects, different lighting setups, different scenes and environments, different focal lengths and compositions, and so on. But my photos just didn't really feel distinct. They didn't feel like me, if that makes sense. I wanted so badly for my photos to feel unique enough that if somebody saw one of my shots, they would know right away, oh, Levi took that. And similar to how gaining an understanding of aperture, shutter speed, and ISO gave me the freedom to create the shots that I envisioned in my mind, gaining the understanding of the tools that I have in my editing software gave me the ability to create the specific look I wanted from my shots. Now, I know in the title that I said all of these tips are easy things to do, but learning to edit is actually going to take quite a bit of time to get really good at. But it is absolutely essential to learn, and once you do, you will be absolutely amazed at the difference it makes. You need to learn to edit your photos. Yes, you can take a photo and just use it like that. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to be a little more creative with it and a little more artistic, and you want to get more out of that photo, pressing the shutter button is only half of what makes the photograph. And editing doesn't have to mean getting a drastically different look from your raw image. Learning to edit will allow you to enhance your photos by removing distracting objects from the image, adjust the colors and contrast, shape the light to draw attention where you'd like it to go, retouch the skin, and so on. And going even further, learning to edit is what will allow you to develop your own unique style that will help you stand out among the crowd. Editing is where your creative vision for those photographs will come to life. Anybody can take a photograph, it's not that hard. But what makes your photography unique to you, your style, is your own personal perspective, and being able to manipulate the images in post is part of where you get to imbue that personal perspective into your shots. Similar to the exposure triangle tip, editing would take an entire video of its own to cover, if not multiple videos, and I don't want this tips video to be too long. I actually did include a little bit of editing in my recent portrait photography tutorial video, so if you want to check that out, you can, but I'm also currently working on a full-length editing video that is going to be coming out soon, so if you want to catch that, be sure to subscribe. In the meantime, I'd say the best ways to improve your editing are YouTube tutorials, dissecting presets, and just playing around with the editing software and familiarizing familiarizing yourself with the tools you have. To clarify what I mean about dissecting presets, let's say you use Lightroom to edit your photos. Go find some Lightroom presets that you really like the look of, download them and apply them to your images. Then go over to your tools panel and look at all of the different things that have been adjusted, and then move them around to see how they're affecting the image. You can disable an entire tool and see what the image looks like with and without those specific adjustments applied. Move the sliders around and see what they're doing, and so on. I personally did this exact thing because I didn't really understand how the tone curve worked. It just went way over my head, but I found a preset I liked, I downloaded it, and I noticed that a lot of the heavy lifting of the look of the image was coming from the tone curve, which led me to play around in the tone curve and see, oh, if I pull this down, it affects the image like this. If I move it here, it affects the image like that. You get the idea. Dissecting presets is a really great way to familiarize yourself with the tools you have in your editing software and how they affect your image in an intuitive and easy way. Tip number 5, rules are meant to be broken. If you're like me, when you bought your first camera, you probably went online to learn about how to take a good picture and encountered all these different rules of photography, like leading lines, rule of thirds, and so on. And while these rules are great starting points when you're first learning to help you create an image that's generally visually appealing and help you with composition, they aren't hard and fast rules. For example, if you go online and ask what the best focal length for portrait photography is, you'll probably see that 50mm, 85mm, or higher are the best for portraits for a variety of reasons. Personally, however, I like to shoot 90% of my portraits with a 35mm. And I do this because I like the way that people look on that focal length. And while it may be considered a wide-angle lens, I still think it's the best focal length for portraits. At least for me anyways. Ultimately, you as the photographer are the only one who is the judge of whether your photograph is good or bad. Unless you're shooting for a client, then it's a little more objective and they will let you know if it's good or bad. Maybe you want to take a photo that's under or overexposed, or maybe you want to take a portrait of somebody that has a ton of empty headroom above them. That's fine, because part of the fun of photography is you get to be artistic with it and express yourself and essentially just do whatever you want with your camera. This tip is just a quick reminder not to constrain yourself too heavily to any kind of rules, and remember that focusing on what you personally think looks good in your photograph and developing that vision is part of your unique personal perspective that makes your photography unique to you. Tip number 6, see photos everywhere you go. Now, this tip is something that will develop naturally the more that you shoot, but intentionally practicing it early on when you're learning will help you grow your skills way faster. When you're out on a walk, hanging out with friends, working your 9 to 5, or relaxing at home on a day off, pay attention to the way that light hits things, to the way it creates shadows and contrast. Try to not just see how things look, but try to understand why they look that way. How many light sources are hitting this object that I'm looking at right now? Are the shadows created by this light source soft or hard? Is the angle that I'm viewing it from part of what makes what I'm looking at look so nice? By deliberately looking for photographs wherever you are, you're going to sharpen your photographic eye much more quickly, and when the time comes that you've got a camera in your hand, you're going to find those shots a lot more easily. Tip number 7, angles. This is our 7th and final tip, and in my opinion, the most important thing you need to think about if you want your photography to really stand out. A photo is only so interesting if it's just a straight-on shot, but if you can experiment with your angles, you can take what could have been a mundane photograph and make it far more interesting. Taking your shot from a place that the human eye wouldn't normally view your subject from is key. You can utilize objects in the foreground to give the image depth and dimension. You can get above your subject or below them. Shooting from a low or high angle changes the feeling of the image. Get up close or further away. If your subject is in a unique environment like water, you can actually get into the water with them so the photo feels more intimate. You can shoot through things that partially obscure your subject. There's really no wrong answer when it comes to experimenting with angles. I actually like this tip so much that I made an entire video for it that you can check out here. And the response that I got to it was actually really surprising. It's such a simple aspect of composition, but I overlooked it for so many years when I was starting out. And judging by the feedback that I got from that video, a lot of people overlooked it as well. I hope you enjoyed the video and got something out of it. And remember that whether you just picked up a camera today for the first time or you've been shooting for 20 years, photography is a never-ending learning process. And that's honestly part of what makes it so much fun. Anyways, that concludes this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna go start working on this editing video now, so have a great week, everybody. Hard cut.